Hello, wrestling fans, guys and girls, children of all ages. Welcome to my review of WCW World Championship Wrestling from January the 5th, 1991. So, exactly 30 years ago today. Oh my goodness, time flies. I'm getting so nostalgic for these shows. Of course, for those of you who follow my channel and my reviews regularly, you will know that yesterday I posted a video from a WWF Superstars taping live show, and today I'm switching to the competition and WCW / the NWA because this is back when they were still collaborating, the two companies. But of course that's going to change pretty soon. Later in the year, in fact, is when WCW would split from the NWA and they would go solo, and I'll cover that when I get to that. So this show comes from WCW's home base of Atlanta, although it's actually Augusta, Georgia, I should say. So Georgia, but Augusta. And your hosts are good old JR, Jim Ross, and Bob Cardle, who were a regular announce team at this time. Two baby faces, which is quite rare, but they have pretty good chemistry, I have to say. And they would announce a few pay-per-views together. Of course, JR, the leading WCW announcer at this time. And the show actually opens with highlights from the previous week's main event, the closing stages, as we see the Z-Man pin Arn Anderson and take his WCW TV title. So that's a real upset, and the Z-Man's first title as a singles wrestler. Now, only time will tell if Tom Sink will be able to repeat his tag team success in singles competition, or if he will be able to establish himself as a singles star. But certainly an upset there from last week's show. And in the opening match of the night, Sid Vicious, not the rock star, but the Four Horsemen member, smashes through jobber Pablo Crenshaw. I think I've got that right. And obviously it's a squash match, but if there's one sort of squash match I enjoy from this time, it's a big monster like Sid Vicious smashing through a job guy. His entrance is just awesome, his power moves, and yeah, just the whole bullying thing I really enjoy watching, I have to say. And say what you will about Sid, but he was a monster and did look the part, and I do enjoy his sort of involvement in the Four Horsemen from around this era, because I think a group like that, you sort of need like a big sort of maniacal monster, and Sid really ticked the boxes. I mean, he came across like that. His promos weren't the best, but he definitely had that sort of presence about him, and the stuff he did in the ring, although he was at times reckless, did sort of look the part. And yeah, obviously basic squash, he smashes through Pablo quite easily. He toys with him at times, but he does that really cool spinning like slam he does. For some reason, he works on his knee at some point outside the ring, so Sid maybe not the sharpest knife in the drawer always, if that's the expression. And then, of course, he wins with his patented power slam in quite quick succession. So Sid Vicious goes over Pablo Crenshaw. Next up, Paulie Dangerously with dodgy 1980s ponytail interviews Rick Rogers about his forthcoming match, which is coming up next against Flying Brian Pillman. And Paulie Dangerously enjoys himself immensely as Rogers claims to be the Marathon Man. And on to the match, Rick Rogers against Flying Brian in this special stipulation match. And the whole thing about Rogers supposedly being the Marathon Man is because the rules for this match state that a wrestler cannot pin the other one or take any kind of fall within the first 5 minutes. And the stipulation itself is a little bit silly, but it actually leads to quite a fun little match. Obviously Pillman, the more established of the two. Rogers, this this preliminary guy who they're trying to give a bit of a push to at this time. And 91, quite a big year for Pillman, with obviously the light heavyweight division being created later on in the year, and he would go on to be the first ever champion. And things would change a lot actually in the US around this time when it comes to high flying wrestling and high risk stuff, which obviously Pillman at this time sort of specialised in. But yeah, the match itself, as I said, you can't pin anyone within the first 5 minutes. So the opening 5 minutes is quite bizarre, because Pillman actually goes for all these different pinfalls, these covers, and I think what makes it even weirder is that the referee actually counts them, even though they wouldn't count if he did get the free. But he tries all these different combinations, and I think the commentators sell that he kind of is in the habit of just going for like pins, because his mindset is, then if it was obviously a normal match, then that would be the rules and stuff. But I think when he keeps doing it, then that's kind of not that convincing. But also, I do kind of like to kind of stretch it and say, well, there is sort of a strategy behind it, because from Pillman's point of view is that maybe if he stays on top of Rogers, keeps the tempo up and keeps going for all these pinfalls, then he can sort of get to the stage 5 minutes in when he'll have him in like a compromising position. Ooh, matron. But yeah, on the other hand, Rogers is playing defense. But I do actually, although it's a bit of a silly rule, and as I said, it's a bit of a farce, the fact that Pillman is going for all these pins in the first 5 minutes. But even so, it does make for quite an interesting like spectacle. And as I said, Rogers is more on defense. He's able to get a couple of like shots in, and able to send Pillman crashing to the floor at one point. The spot of the match, without a doubt, and it sort of goes to what I was talking about with Pillman and his his spectacular high risk moves, is that at one point Pillman skins the cat back in, and he takes Rogers over, but then when he's back in, Rogers is able to like duck out of the way when Pillman goes for like a rolling schoolboy, and Pillman hits the outside hard. But then when Rogers comes out after him, Pillman is able to block a guardrail shot, send Rogers headfirst into the rail, and then we get the spot of the match, the one I'm talking about, where he basically jumps off. He goes up onto like a platform near the ringside, near the fans. So the fans are like around him, so it looks really cool as well. And he dives off from quite a great height, flying clothesline, and the crowd pop for it a lot, and it just looks really spectacular. I think it's one of those spots. If it was like now, it would sort of be nothing, but you have to, think of the context. US wrestling in the early 90s, you very rarely saw spots like that. So, sort of Pillman was ahead of the game in that. So it's a good little spot, and one to sort of look back of and say how ahead of its time it was. And they do have a pretty decent little match, as I said. I think Rogers is a pretty solid worker, and a good sort of like grounded sort of heel in a way. And there's some good timing actually. There's a spot quite late on when Pillman's going for the win, and he goes up to the top rope, goes for like a splash, and Rogers gets the knees up just in the nick of time, gets knees into the guts, and the timing of that is very good actually. So I think Rogers is a decent enough worker. But yeah, in the end, Pillman, with a sunset flip from the top, another spectacular looking moves, is able to get the win, and he gets the win and kind of proves a point. and I'll give the match 2.5 stars. I thought it lasted 5 or 6 minutes, I think. So, well, a bit more, I guess, but it was 6, 7 minutes, something like that. And I thought, for what it was, I quite enjoyed it. As I said, the stipulation may be a little bit silly, but I did enjoy it enough. Speaking of enjoyment, how about this? Next up, we have an ad for a WCW Sexiest Man contest. Now, maybe in the WWE, although I think with them it would more likely be women, but it's sort of not the thing you think about in WCW. But yeah, what I love about it is fans can vote, obviously, but what's funny is that you have people like Lex Luger, Sting, Tom Zink. I think Pillman's in there. The sort of people you, and then you have Terry Taylor, and for some reason that just tickles me. Not that he's not a good-looking guy, but I don't know. Terry Taylor sort of tickles me. We have another recap from last week. Tom Zink winning the TV title, and a lot of this show is sort of built around that. And actually, the field, the competition for his television title. And I will say, actually, it's a pretty strong-looking field, and that they get across the competitive nature of the bout and the people challenging, and they build quite a nice story over the the broadcast, because his first defence is against Dr. X, which Seaman mentions, and you've got Terry Taylor, who basically feels sort of hurt and let down that he didn't get the shot that Seaman got last week. I'll talk more about that, but basically his whole beef is that he took Anderson, the former champion, to the limit 3 weeks in a row, and so he wanted that sort of shot, and is sort of acting quite heelish, but the whole deal is that because of his performances against Anderson, he expects to be in line for a title shot, so he's sort of putting pressure on kind of Seaman and the championship committee, I guess. So next up, we have Beautiful Bobby against Reno Riggins, and Reno Riggins is just one of those like familiar heel names, which I've just heard. Well, not heel, but jobber name sort of thing. I have a feeling he must have worked in WWE or something like that, but it's just a name which stands out to me. So I feel that he must have had some sort of a run at some point, but. Yeah, Bobby Eaton recently gone singles in WCW since Jim Cornette, his ex-Midnight Express manager, and Stan Lane, his Midnight Express tag partner, basically quit in disgust. And when I say quit in disgust, I mean, yeah, literally quit in disgust. That's legit. So Bobby was then moved into singles naturally, and first time he's really had a proper singles run. He's been feuding with the Z-Man. He beat him, I think, at Starrcade at the end of 1990. And actually, he now has a TV title shot coming up against the Z-Man at the Clash of Champions. So they sort of push that. So again, you get a sense of the field. And it's another squash match, but credit to Bobby, because he does give Reno Riggins, the jobber, some offense. There's a nice. The highlight for Riggins is a nice leapfrog and a drop kick, but ultimately, obviously, Bobby's going to come out on top, and he wins with his Alabama Jam leg drop off the top rope. And again, speaking of Pillman, as I was in the previous match, Bobby Eaton, another sort of innovator of the time for high risks in the US, and that sort of obviously was a feature for when the Midnight Express were together. We then have Paulie Dangerously again. He's back on the mic, back in the interview booth. He's interviewing Terry Taylor, who he calls Mr. Goody Two Shoes, which is just brilliant. But he's kind of mocking him because the sort of kind of sour grapes, if you like, over the fact that he didn't get the title shot. But Taylor's sort of pushing that. As I said, I think he's acting quite heelish, so I'm not sure if they were like maybe transitioning him into a heel turn at this point. I certainly always think Terry Taylor works better as a heel than as a face, but I can't remember, to be honest, if they go that way around this time. But it sort of wouldn't surprise me seeing the way he's kind of acting on this show. Next up, we have another squash match, and it's a pretty useless one. Nothing really to report here. You've got the Renegade Warriors against I think it's Chuck Gurnott or something, and Ed Brock. Random heel names once again, and yeah, nothing to report. The Renegade Warriors were a useless face Native American team. Feuded with the Freebirds, had a match with them at Halloween Havoc. That's probably the most notable thing, but yeah, not the best workers, and the gimmick never really got anywhere with the fans. So pretty dull match, this one. Obviously, the Warriors win. You have a leg drop off the top from Youngblood to get the win for them in that one. And now we come to the crappy debut of Manotaur, another gimmick ahead of its time. And this is played by Puerto Rico wrestling legend Steven Disaluno. And he is decked out in a crappy leotard. He's got a shoulder piece. He's got scary Alice Cooper looking hair and features. He basically looks like he was produced from a chemical like tube in the WCW power plant. Basically, it's his television debut, and he just looks ridiculous. It's one of those cheesy, bad, goofy, but kind of so bad it's good gimmick. And he's up against Mountain Man Bailey in his debut, if you can believe that. And well, he wins with an elbow drop in quick order. That's right. His finisher is an elbow drop, folks. Just take that in. Fuck me. This really shows you the cartoon era Bill Hurd of WCW at its fullest. Minotaur, a gimmick so good that WWF ripped it off just a few years later. That was the debut of Minotaur, and as good old JR, Jim Ross helpfully points out, a character ripped out of the pages of Greek mythology. Indeed, he is half man, half bull. Just take that in, folks. Okay, more jobber matches now, a bit more useful. Lex Luger goes over Mike Samples, and he wins with the Human Torture Rack pretty quickly. But the story at the moment with Luger, the US champ, is that he has a football-style rules match coming up with the Big Cat at a special house show event coming up, which they're giving the big hype. And just to add a bit more prestige, a bit more celebrity to it, they've got Lawrence Taylor. LT is booked for it in this special. I think it's in the Midlands or somewhere like that. But anyway, they're doing the whole football style gimmick where basically they're going to wear shoulder pads, and the winner is the first one to knock the other person out of the ring. And just for good measure, Paulie Dangerously is going to be in the corner of the Big Cat. But they're hyping up that, and you have to say again, maybe WWF were riding WCW's coattails, because of course a few years later, headlining WrestleMania was none other than LT Lawrence Taylor, because he of course was in the main event against Bam Bam Bigelow that year. And needless to say, the WWF got probably more success out of using LT than WCW, but they're obviously hyping that match. And fittingly enough, Luger wins with a shoulder tackle, a football style tackle, if you like, off the ropes. Next up, we have Michael Wall Street with his assistant Alexandra York at ringside, or just Alexandra York. I keep doing that, it's just York. And he goes up against jobber Greg Sawyer. Now, the whole gimmick for York and for her men, particularly Michael Wall Street, in case you didn't know around this time, is that it was obviously a Wall Street style gimmick, and they're sort of capitalizing on the kind of growing trend of computers and kind of statistics and stuff like that, because what would happen is that York, played by Terry Reynolds, who would obviously be a name in the WWE a few years later, she would carry around a computer with her to ringside, and she would supposedly, before the match, she would like put in some statistics or a search type thing, and based on who Michael Wall Street is facing, and based on that, she would come up with a prediction. The computer would predict how quickly he would beat his opponents. So that's the whole deal, and I absolutely love this shit. I mean, I know some people might think it's a bit sort of goofy and silly, but I love it. I think it's kind of, really at the time, really contemporary and almost ahead of its time. And it's just such a cool sort of gimmick for a heel, because what they would do is, like, after she sets the prediction how quickly he's going to beat his opponent, you would then have a clock on the screen, so counting it down. So I think that just adds real excitement, the fact that you can see the minutes and the seconds clicking down. And it's just one of those things. They've set up these rules so you then can play with them and get heat. Obviously, as Wall Street faces more competent opponents, that they can really sort of challenge that and play with it. But probably a sort of gimmick you're either going to love or hate, but I really dug it. And obviously he beats Sawyer, no surprise. And Alexandra York, the computer predicts that he'll do it in under 5 minutes. And it's kind of a no-brainer, this one, because probably against a jobber he should probably be winning around that time. But in the end, he wins about at 2:57, and he wins with the stock market crash, which is really just a cool name. It's basically just something like a Samoan chop or something, but a cool name for the thing. And I do really like the gimmick. Now after the match, Wall Street and York are interviewed by Missy Hyatt, and there's basically this rivalry at the time between Missy Hyatt and Paulie Dangerously, because they're both kind of like interviewers, broadcasters, and they're getting like super competitive, and they've got an arm wrestling match coming up. And it's basically sort of, well, I think Missy technically is meant to be a face, but she kind of the character leans towards being a heel. I mean, maybe she is classed as a heel. She certainly comes off at times more like a heel. And Paulie, obviously, definitely a heel. But yeah, they start squabbling. Like, Paulie gets mad because she's doing the interview and not him, and basically Missy and Alexandra York accuse Heyman at one point of being sort of sexist. So it's sort of, and that's quite a cool moment, because York, decked out in business attire, she's a kind of, as it was then, a modern like businesswoman and stuff. So they kind of turning the heat on Dangerously, saying, "Hey, are you being sexist?" with this whole thing. Next up, we have the TV title match, the Z-Men's first events, and it's against the Dr. X, basically, a guy in a hood, quite a big guy, but he's really not great. It's a very sloppy match. Dr. X stumbles around the ring like a drunk man, and it's not too long before Seaman gets the win with a drop kick off the top rope. But yeah, pretty sloppy match. We have Terry Taylor at ringside on commentary at one point, again reinforcing that he's after a title shot in the future. And the match itself, I'll give 1.5 stars. It's not the best, but obviously bigger challenges ahead for the Seaman. We then get sort of a recap of recent events with the Fabulous Freebirds and the Steiner brothers. We see that the Freebirds basically trick the Steiners, or trick Rick Steiner anyway, into giving them a US tag title shot, and you have this one-on-one match with Michael and Rick Steiner, and the whole thing is that if Michael wins, then the Freebirds get a US tag title shot. It's pretty funny actually, because what happens is during the match, at one point the referee gets distracted and Michael starts faking an eye injury, and the idea is that the ref turns around and thinks that Rick Steiner did it, so they get DQ'd. And then you see the Freebirds later do an interview, and at first Michael's selling the eyes, and then they just start laughing, and that's the whole ruse. But it's kind of silly because, as I said, the referee's back is turned at the time, so why would he necessarily believe that Rick had anything to do with it, or then he did anything illegal anyway? I mean, certainly if he doesn't see it, he can't really say, oh, he must hit him in the eye with an object or something. No, it doesn't really work like that if you don't see it. But in any case, it's a fun little heelish thing for the Freebirds to be doing. And we then see them in a tag team match against, Keith Hart and, is it Mac... I'm not sure. Is it Ian McKenna? Something like that anyway. But, Keith Hart. So I'm guessing that's Bret Hart's brother as well, because several of the Hart family have gotten into wrestling. So wouldn't be surprised if that is Bret's brother. But Freebirds, again, obviously jobber match, but they really kick up a storm, and you get stereo DDTs and a double pin, they both pin a guy at the same time and they win. So Freebird's definitely one of my favourite tag teams, just for the characters, the personalities from around this time. We also find out that Norman is mad with Sid Vicious because Sid basically hurt his feelings, and we find out that they're going to be having a one-on-one match on next week's show, I think. Then we move to the WCW Classic section with Gordon Solie, the legend that is Gordon Solie. And this week they are looking at the 1988 Clash of the Champions match, the first Clash of Champions between Sting and Ric Flair, their first ever meeting of note anyway, which of course went to a 45-minute time limit draw. And that's sort of really fitting because, of course, Flair and Sting are feuding once again over the NWA title. So that's the recap there. And then we get what's the main event, essentially, Terry Taylor against Arn Anderson. And almost because Arn's the former champion, Terry, obviously, Taylor is in the picture because of his performances against Double A, and it's sort of a crucial match really in the TV title picture, and it's a pretty solid little match. Anderson starts off the aggression, but Terry Taylor uses his quickness. At one point, he ducks down out of the ring and grabs Arn's arm, if you excuse the pun, and wraps it around the ring post. So then Solid Wrestling sort of focuses on the arm. He gets an armbar slam at one point, couple of near falls. Anderson sort of bounces back with his vintage spine buster catching Terry Taylor off the ropes. No one does that better than Double A. Again, he sort of slows down the tempo, but he does make a couple of uncharacteristic, if you will, aerial maneuvers where he tries a couple and just, it doesn't work. He gets caught. At one point, he gets caught up top and goes for a ride on the rocket launcher from Terry Taylor. But in the end, Arn does steal the victory. He catches Taylor with a roll up, and he rolls through and gets the feet on the ropes, but the referee doesn't see it. Extra leverage. Arn gets the free, and there you have it. I mean, that's sort of the main event basically, but a good match, for a TV match. 2.5 stars. I'll give it. And we see an interview with JR and LT. So again, they're sort of hyping Lawrence Taylor's involvement with the Luger match in Lex's corner. Of course, LT, big, NFL star, in case you don't know who he is. And the takeaway from that is basically that he finds it funny that Paulie Dangerously, his name, Paulie, what sort of man's name is that? He's sort of ripping on him for sort of having a sissy name. Nothing much else to say about that interview. And the actual final match of the show is that we have Tim Horner against George South. Tim Horner, one of Jim Cornette's favourites, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, yeah. He hates Tim Horner. There's a whole rant about him from Corny on there on the tubes, but nothing match really. In a way, he's got two jobbers, but obviously Horner's the one they're kind of trying to push. But anyway, he just wins with a roll up and puts it into a bridge for the free, but bit of a nothing match. And we actually end the show with Paulie and Missy basically being interviewed by JR. He tells them to both act professional, to do their job while they're broadcasting together, but of course they don't act professionally. The whole thing breaks down. They have pots at each other, and Dangerously makes another sexist remarks, and then boom, slap round the kisser by Missy, and that's how they end the show. And of course, they're going to have an arm wrestling match to try and sort out their differences at the Clash. So there you have it. That's WCW World Championship Wrestling from the 5th of January 1991, and I'll be back with more classic wrestling reviews from 91 coming up on the channel soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.